Good morning, everyone. This morning, we'll be looking in the book of Ruth. Now, we've already begun a Ruth series in our Sunday Bible studies. But given that we ended right in the middle of a passage, and that we can't assume that everyone has been at the Bible studies, we will be repeating some of the material from Naomi's return with her daughters-in-law to Bethlehem of Judah, returning from Moab, where they sojourned for 10 years without her husband, without her sons, with her Moabite daughters-in-law. But we'll be focusing particularly on Ruth's final speech to Naomi as she turns to Yahweh, the God of Israel, and gives up her Moabite family, nation, identity, and gods. And so go ahead, if you haven't already, turn to the book of Ruth. Now, in the opening of the book of Ruth, we'll touch on it just very briefly. It opens in the context in the days when the judges ruled. And in the time of the judges, there were cycles of sin and rebellion under the old covenant in which God's people would sin against him, they would rebel, they would worship false gods and false idols, and God would bring judgment upon them. The judgments, the curses written in the covenant. And so he would bring famine upon them, famine upon the land. He would bring foreign enemies and rulers to rule over them. And the people would suffer, and inevitably they would turn to the Lord, they would cry out for him to save them, and he would be merciful and relent from his anger, and he would redeem them. And so this is within the period of Judges, and the central message of the book of Judges is there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so although the book of Ruth is a bright spot within the period of the Judges, it opens very characteristically of the book of Judges. Just read on. In the day when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, which anyone who knows the curses of the covenant would know that famine was among them. And so the book of Ruth opens in a very dark, bleak period within Israel's history, but by the time we get to the end of the book, you have the Davidic line, and you have the Davidic king that God is going to raise up. And so in this very opening section, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, or Elimelech, he takes his family, instead of the proper response in the context of famine of turning to the Lord, crying out to him, trusting for his provision, he brought his family to seek refuge in Moab, in a foreign land with a foreign king, the people served foreign gods. In fact, the Moabites were the ones that when Israel came out on the Exodus, they would not grant Israel safe passage through the land, even though the Israelites said they would pay for water, they would pay for food, if they would just give them passage through the land. But not only did they not grant them passage, Balak the king summoned Balaam the false prophet to curse Israel. When that didn't work, Yahweh returned the curse with a blessing, made Balaam bless his people. They conspired to have the Israelites fall into idolatry through sexual relations and marriage with foreign women, Moabites, Midianites, the foreign women from the surrounding peoples. And you can read about that in the book of Numbers. And just to summarize the relationship with the Moabites, Deuteronomy chapter 23. We have those who are excluded from the assembly. And in chapter 23, verse 3, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of Yahweh, even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of Yahweh forever." Here's the reason. "Because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam, the son of Beor, from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you. But Yahweh your God would not listen to Balaam. Instead, Yahweh your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because Yahweh your God loved you. You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all your days forever." Now listen to this. This is also relevant because there were tensions with the Edomites, but God says through Moses, "You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you were a sojourner in his land." Despite what the Pharaoh and the people of Egypt did to the Israelites to oppress them and to curse them, they're not to abhor them. But a Moabite or an Ammonite cannot enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. And of the Edomites and the Egyptians, children born to them in the 3rd generation may enter the assembly of Yahweh. So Elimelech, he, instead of turning to the Lord to trust in him for his provision, he turned to Moab to sojourn among the foreign peoples and kings and gods with his family. And so first, you see the unwise action, the sin of Elimelech, and then of his sons, and they're paralleled. At the end, Naomi is left without her husband. She's left without her sons, a widow with Moabite widows whom her sons married. And so starting in verse 1, "In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. And a man of Bethlehem in Judah, from the house of bread, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Machlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons." Now we turn to the sons' action. We saw the father taking his family to Moab to sojourn, and now the sons go even further. "These took Moabite wives. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Machlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband." It could have just said the woman was left, but she was left without her 2 sons and her husband, making us think about the loss very specifically that she has just suffered. And so now she is a widow. And widows were one of the most vulnerable people in ancient times in ancient Israel, among others, but foreigners and widows and orphans, children. But Naomi She's a widow. She's suffered loss, the loss of her husband, the loss of her sons. She has lost pretty much everything. And now we turn to the passage that we'll be focusing on. Here, Naomi will arise. She now becomes the central actor, first her husband, then her sons. Now Naomi will act. She will hear that Yahweh has been merciful to his people and provided them with bread. So she's going to arise with her Moabite daughters-in-law to return to Bethlehem of Judah in Israel. But as they set out on their journey, Naomi is going to try to dissuade her daughters-in-law from returning with her. She's going to command and exhort and admonish them to return to Moab, to return to their mother's house, to go back to their people. And so along the way, as Naomi tries to persuade them, 3 times we'll see her try to persuade her daughters-in-law. There will be 3 different interchanges or exchanges of dialogue between Naomi and her daughters-in-law. In the first, she will command them to return back to Moab, to their mother's houses. And she's going to encourage them to return positively, praying that Yahweh would bless them in Moab among their families, and that they would find Moabite husbands and households where they would find rest. And so in the first dialogue, the first exchange between Naomi and her daughters-in-law, she's going to try to encourage them to return positively, through positive encouragement. After her daughters-in-law reject her admonishment, Naomi is going to try, so they'll say, we want to return with you. The second time Naomi tries to get them to go back to Moab, she's going to use negative motivation. That basically Naomi is cursed. There's no prospect of a husband or children with her. And so it's really, really bad. Naomi's state is horrible and bitter, and if they go back with her, they're going to be partakers in that. And so the idea is that they would find blessing in Moab, among the Moabites, with the foreign gods. And then that's where we'll see the parting of the ways of Ruth and Orpah. And Naomi will give one last effort to get Ruth to return with her sister-in-law. And that's where we will see that Ruth forsakes her people, the Moabites, to embrace the Israelite people, and more particularly, the God of Israel, Yahweh. And so let's read through this whole section. I just want you to notice these 3 interchanges between Naomi and her daughters-in-law. The first, Ruth and Orpah will be involved. The third time, Ruth is going to be the only one that Naomi is trying to convince, because Orpah left and returned to Moab, just as Naomi told her. So starting in verse 6. Then she, Naomi, arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that Yahweh had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Now this introduces the first dialogue as they have set out. Verse 8. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go, return each of you to her mother's house. May Yahweh deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Yahweh grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband." Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, here's the second interchange, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night, and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they were grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me." Then their second response, "Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said," here's the third time, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Yahweh do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. And so back to verse 6. And we'll summarize some of the things in these verses. So we're not going to necessarily go into every little detail. There are a lot of details in Scripture. There's a lot of richness that we could spend a lot of time on. And I don't expect you to memorize every detail when we're looking at a long passage like this. I want you to get the main point that's repeated over and over throughout this passage. And we'll be seeing that as Naomi encourages her daughters-in-law to return, but Ruth stands firm, clings to her mother-in-law, but also holds fast to Yahweh, the God of Israel. So I don't expect you to memorize every little detail, but to get the main point as we go along. Then as you read this passage, all of those little details, even those we touch on today, you'll understand them better in the context of the passage as a whole, in the main point. And so, looking at verse 6, we'll begin their journey home. And so we see Naomi's initial departure. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. And now previously, her daughters-in-law have been related to their husbands who took Moabite wives. We learned their names, Orpah and Ruth. But here, they're not called Orpah and Ruth. They're not called the wives or the widows of Machlon and Kilion. They're referred to as Naomi's daughters-in-law. And so by their familial relations and bonds through marriage, they are now connected to Naomi, who has become the main actor at this part in the story. She is the one who arose with her daughters-in-law. to return from the country of Moab. And here's the reason. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that Yahweh had visited his people and given them food. Now she heard it not in the fields of Bethlehem or of Judah or of Israel, but in the fields of Moab. And she's outside. And so God has visited his people, the Israelites, to bring his blessing upon them, to bring the rains, to bring the harvest, to cause the plants to sprout forth. His anger has relented, and later, Lord willing, when we go into chapter 2 and later into the story, you'll see people who had apparently remained in Bethlehem and remained in the land, who were there to greet Naomi when she returned. And people like Boaz who fear the Lord and trust the Lord. And so there are people who turned to the Lord, who cried out to him. God's anger hasn't abided forever, but he has had mercy to give them food or bread, just like there was famine in the house of bread, Bethlehem, but now he has given bread, food. So she, Naomi, set out from the place where she was, Moab, where she was with her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And then this brings us to the first interchange where we're going to turn to this dialogue that Naomi initiates with her daughters-in-law. And actually, we'll see, she doesn't even expect them to respond. She just expects them to obey and heed what she says. So verse 8, but Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to her mother's house. Now we're going to see these exhortations repeat again. Go, return. This is the main point, the main exhortation. And pretty much everything else we see is going to support this exhortation to motivate Naomi and Ruth to heed her words. So go, return each of you to her mother's house. And where do their mothers live? In Moab, among the Moabites, as we shall see, the Moabite gods. And here now, Naomi calls out, prays, wishes that Yahweh, the Lord, would bless them in Moab. May the Lord deal kindly with you, or graciously, faithfully, chesed. Sometimes it's translated God's covenant faithfulness, his loving kindness, but by which God acts faithfully and undeservedly toward his people and toward people in his dealings with them. So may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. And there she refers to the dead, not her husbands or sons, and it's reminding us again of this loss that Naomi has suffered of her husband, her sons, but also the husbands, the now deceased, of Orpah and Ruth. And so we have these 3 widows, and as Naomi says, they had dealt kindly with them and with the dead during their sojourn in Moab, during the 10 years. And well, let's read verse 9. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. And so her hope for them and her plea is that Yahweh would give them blessing and rest in Moab with their Moabite husbands that they would find, rather than in Bethlehem of Judah in Israel. And we know that the Israelites had a unique status before the Lord, in unique covenant relationship with him. And the nations were to be blessed through Israel. But she's exhorting them to go back to Moab rather than to go with her. Later in the book of Ruth, we'll see that Ruth finds rest in the household of Boaz, who is a Davidic descendant. And so she finds a husband. But right now, Naomi's focus is not on finding blessing with her or in Israel, but may the Lord grant you rest in Moab. And then look at the rest of verse 9. We see the responses of her daughters-in-law. First, Naomi, then she kissed them. And kiss culturally, it could be used as a greeting. It could be used to say farewell. Here, Naomi has commanded them to return and exhorted them, return to Moab. Then she kissed them, farewell. She doesn't expect any backtalk or any resistance. She expects them to return to Moab. But it goes on, she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And so they're lamenting what she has just told them, what she has just said to them, to part ways with her, to go back to their mother's houses, back to Moab, and separate from their mother-in-law with whom they formed familial bonds. And they're lamenting and expressing their outpouring of grief. They lifted up their voices and wept, and they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." And so they directly contradict her. Return to Moab? No, we will return with you to your people. And so they oppose Naomi's pleas for them to go back to Moab in this first one. And so Ruth and Orpah are united in lifting up their voices in lament and grief and sorrow. Together they said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." And so just keep that in mind as Naomi tries once more to convince them to go to Moab. Verse 11, this brings us to the second interchange. But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me?" Now, as the first interchange was positive, we're going to see this one takes a negative turn. So the first one calling for God to grant them rest, to show them his chesed, his faithfulness. Now she's going to give the negative reasons not to go back with her, but instead to go to Moab. Turn back, my daughters. That's new. Now they already know that Naomi is talking to her, so Naomi doesn't have to get their attention. She doesn't have to say my daughters, but it's a device for grabbing attention. What she's saying is important. We'll see this repeated as she gives her exhortations, which again is the main point. Go back to Moab, return, go, walk. Turn back, my daughters. But it also characterizes the relationship between Naomi and Ruth and Orpah, her daughters-in-law. My daughters. And so this is Naomi speaking as a mother to her daughters. And so it's a reminder of their familial relationship, their close bond. Probably also that Naomi is commanding them to go back. I mean, a daughter should listen to her mother, should she not? Daughters should listen to their mothers. Mothers have a certain authority to speak and to give advice and counsel and to command their children. But Naomi may not intend this, but also by referring to them as her daughters, it's also a reminder of the familial obligation and responsibilities that Ruth and Orpah have to Naomi. They're all widows, but Ruth and Orpah are younger widows. Naomi is an older widow, and they have familial obligations and responsibility to her. And so Naomi is trying to convince them to go back, but whether she passively intends it or not, maybe unwittingly, it's also a reminder that if they do go back, they will be leaving and abandoning their mother-in-law to this journey home, which would take some time and could have dangers along the way, but just even the dangers and the hardship of being an elderly widow. And so this is a mother speaking to her daughters. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Implicitly, there's no reason to go back with her. Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Of course not. She's not pregnant. She doesn't have sons that they could, like right now, sons, don't really want to say it, but buns in the oven, that she would have children in her womb presently as she's speaking with them that she would hopefully give birth to, who would grow up, who could potentially be their husbands after they're fully mature. She doesn't have sons in her womb that they would have the prospect of future husbands. Verse 12, turn back, my daughters, go your way. And now she doubles down. She takes this even further, almost to the point of absurdity. For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope. Now, she's not saying she does have hope, but if I should say, I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night, as they're setting out on their journey from Moab back to Judah and Bethlehem. So if Naomi just happened to stumble upon a husband this night, and I should bear sons in her old age, would you therefore wait till they are grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters. She answers her own question. No, 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 no. You would not wait till they're grown if that just happened to happen, even though I'm too old for it to happen. Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No. Now, we don't know how old Ruth and Orpah are, but they went and sojourned in Moab. The sons took Moabite wives, and they lived there 10 years. So we know that they were already of mature adult age for marriage when they were married. 10 years have passed. Naomi's too old, but even if it should happen anyway, she'd get a husband this night and bear sons, then they would have to grow up. Naomi and Orpah, if Naomi is past the age for a husband in childbearing, humanly speaking, then Ruth and Orpah would be past their prime age for marriage and childbearing in all likelihood. So would they therefore wait? No, my daughters. See, this is it's negative, trying to convince them that there is nothing in store for them if they return with Naomi. And now this supports, but it kind of encapsulates what's in the background. Naomi says, "For it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake," or it's rendered differently sometimes. It could be that it's more bitter for her lot, than theirs. But the focus, either way, is on Naomi's bitter state. And that's supported by, "For it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake, that the hand of Yahweh has gone out against me." And so Naomi sees herself under the judgment and curse of Yahweh, of the Lord. So there's nothing going for them. If they return with her, they will just continue to bear the effects of the judgment, the curse that Naomi is facing. So Naomi has no future prospects, and neither will they if they go with her. Now, some of you might be asking to yourself, what about Sarah? Didn't Sarah give birth in old age? I think she gave birth at the age of 91, and she conceived at 90, right around there. Abraham at 100. Can't God grant a husband? Can't God grant children in his own good purpose? What about Rebekah also? Isaac and Rebekah prayed, and God opened up her womb, and she conceived. What about Rachel and Leah? What about the whole host of women that God provided children, sons and daughters? Cannot God act also for Naomi and for Ruth and Orpah? But that's not where Naomi's head is at this point. We know that she has heard that God had visited his people to provide them with bread, with food, with sustenance. And so she's returning to Judah. But at this point, we don't know or see that she's returning spiritually, that she's repenting. But she's traveling back, she's physically returning. And she's not thinking about it from God's perspective, but from man's perspective. And so here we have the response to Naomi's exhortation. Verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. Again. That links us back to the first time that Ruth and Orpah lifted up their voices and wept in lamentation, an outpouring of grief and sorrow for the exhortation. So if we stop right there, we expect Ruth and Orpah are united. Again, they are acting in unison. They're lifting up their voices together. And they said no to Naomi, but we will return with you. But, very next line, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. And now the kiss mirrors the kiss that Naomi gave them after the first interchange in verse, it's the end of verse 9. Then she kissed them, Naomi kissed them, and then you have their lament. And so now Orpah is returning that farewell kiss, and she's kissing her mother-in-law goodbye. And it says, we've seen her referred to as Naomi previously, but now Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. There's a change in how it refers to Naomi. It doesn't say Orpah kissed Naomi. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law. Again, reminding of the familial bonds that have been formed, and also the obligation and responsibility that goes with it. And now we have the severing of it. So she didn't just kiss anyone farewell. She's kissing her mother-in-law. We're to think of her in terms of this is her mother-in-law, Orpah is her daughter-in-law, and she is parting ways from this elderly widow. But this makes Ruth's response all the more striking. But Ruth clung to her. And the clinging is even same terminology. I'm not saying it's the same relationship, but in the garden, when God brought the woman to the man, and they formed covenant bonds of marriage, it says that a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And in that context, again, you have a familial relationship, you have a clinging, a holding fast. The clinging are what the Israelites are supposed to do with Yahweh. They're to cling, they're to hold fast to Yahweh, their God, to whom they have covenant bonds. They're to love the Lord their God, and they're to cling and hold fast to him. Now, not every context is necessarily a positive context, but here we have, again, a familial context, and Ruth clings, holds fast to Naomi, to her mother-in-law, in contrast with Orpah, who kisses her mother-in-law goodbye. And Orpah, the exact meaning, original meaning of her name is debated, likely pertains to the neck or the nape of the neck, with the mane of hair, where the hair and the neck meet. So potentially a very beautiful name, but it's very easily associated with the Hebrew word for neck, which would be similar to some of the other associations that we saw in our previous classes, like with machlon and kilion. There are easy associations with sickness, with completion, which could be a good thing, but can also be like finito, like complete, as in like destroyed, as far as word plays go. But the neck is often associated with people who turn or return. They turn their neck or they stiffen their neck. And so many have made an association with Orpah and her response. And quickly just look at, there's going to be kind of a male Orpah in Ruth chapter 4. A nameless, faceless man from Bethlehem of Judah, who's not known to memory because he would not marry Ruth, the Moabitess. And so he was not part of the Davidic line. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And the phrase peloni almoni, here they say friend, they're just trying to capture this is a very generic way to refer to someone, not by name. We never get his name, never get his identity. His name is entirely lost to history. And so where he was first in line to raise up offspring for the family, I think it's for Machlon, and Ruth, the widow, he denied to be the kinsman redeemer, and so he's not part of the Davidic line. His name is forgotten to history, but Boaz, we do know. Boaz is part of the Davidic line. This man was just concerned about his own inheritance and his own well-being. And so Orpah could have traveled back. She could have become part of God's covenant people and turned back to Yahweh, but instead she went back to, go back to chapter 1. Here we have the third interchange. It'll be just between Naomi and Ruth. And she said, Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." Now, Naomi didn't explicitly command or exhort them to go back to their gods and go back to their people, but it's an implication of returning to Moab, to returning to their mother's household and marrying Moabite men. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh. They worshipped false gods. They worshipped the Baals, the lords. And so they had false gods that they served. And so Naomi is just taking the implication that by Ruth or by Orpah returning, not only did she return to her mother's household, where Naomi was praying that she'd find blessing there, but the reality, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. She's gone back to her idolatry. And so it's not a good state for Orpah by returning. And before they had said, "No, we'll go with you to your people." But now Orpah has returned to her people and her gods. And Naomi calls Orpah, refers to Orpah, not as her daughter, but as your sister-in-law. Your sister-in-law has returned. So now Ruth is thinking about the connection. Orpah's connected now to Ruth, primarily, not Naomi, to Ruth. That's your sister-in-law. She returned. They're both Moabites. They were both Moabite wives who married into Naomi's family. Your sister-in-law has returned. Return after your sister-in-law. Do likewise. That's Naomi's last call and commandment to Ruth to return. And now we get Ruth's final response. This is the culmination of the entire passage. But Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you." And so that's Ruth's point. She directly contradicts and opposes Naomi, her mother-in-law, and turns it to the opposite. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you." And Naomi had said to return to their mother's household and spoke about her sister-in-law returning to her people and to her gods. But Ruth gets to the crux of the issue. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you," her mother-in-law, with whom she's formed a bond, to whom she also has responsibility and care and concern for. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you." And here's the support that Ruth gives. It's going to be just as comprehensive and more so than Naomi's. Negatively, she tells Naomi no. Positively, "For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge." And now I want you to see as we read through this that there's a chiasm. I wish I had a handout for you today. I can put one on the website and bring one to a future class. But let me show you this chiasm and then we'll work through it briefly. So at the beginning and the end, we have Ruth's exhortation, admonishment, saying, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you." She opens there, and she will end with calling upon the Lord, basically to bring a curse upon her, that if she would violate this, turning away from Naomi. May the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And then the second part of the chiasm, we see it focuses on the place. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Then second to last, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So focusing on the place, where they'll go, where she'll be died and buried, together with Naomi, and at the very center and heart of it, echoing Naomi's words, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. That's the very center and heart of this chiasm. There are 2 lines each, A, B, C, B, A, working down the chiasm. So let's go line by line. We saw, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. Here's the reasoning, the support. Negatively, Naomi, don't do this. Don't tell me to return. This is why. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. And so they are going on this journey, returning to Judah. And so most immediately, she will go with Naomi to Bethlehem of Judah. But this is all, as we read through this, we'll see it's much more comprehensive, pertaining to all of life. And where you lodge, I will lodge. A lot of times referring to spending the night somewhere, like on the way as they're traveling and sojourning along the way, traveling. And so both in the activity of going, in the rest of lodging or spending the night, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. And previously, Ruth and Orpah, to Naomi's first exhortation, had said that we will go with you to your people. In verse 10, your people, Naomi's people. And Naomi has just said that Ruth, or that Orpah, has returned to her people and to her gods. And so now Ruth no longer refers to them as your people or to your God. Now Ruth claims for herself, your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. She's denouncing and renouncing her own people. She's forsaking her own people, her own family, the Moabites, the Moabite people, the Moabite foreign gods, to become one of the people of Israel and to become a follower of Yahweh, the God of Israel, the God of Naomi. And then we get again to the location. Before it was where you go, I will go, where you lodge, I will lodge. So that's in life. Now in death, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And families in Israel would be buried in a family tomb. Their bones would be dried out. They'd be gathered and collected together. They would turn to dust, to dirt. And so they would be gathered physically together in a family tomb. And so this again has those familial themes, but in life, in death, Ruth will be where Naomi is. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And now we get to the very end of it. She had admonished Naomi, do not tell me to return from following you. And she implores the Lord, may the Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. Here it could be rendered, if death parts me from you. And I think that's probably more likely. She had just said, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And so not even death would separate Ruth from Naomi and from her familial bonds to her. May the Lord do so to me and more, also probably implying bring death upon her if she goes astray and leaves Naomi, if death parts me from you. And so even in death, life and death, she will hold fast to Naomi. And the final verse 18, and when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Naomi has nothing left to say after that. Ruth was so comprehensive and so insistent that she will cling fast to Naomi, she will go with her, and that her God is Yahweh, the God of Israel. And then let's just read through the end of the chapter. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem, and when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara," bitter, instead of Naomi, which is pleasantness or sweetness. "For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me?" So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And there, although Naomi's fixated upon the judgment and the curse and the anger of the Lord upon her, and yes, she is empty in the sense that she has lost her husband, she has lost her sons, she has seemingly lost everything that is important to her. So we understand her emptiness, and that's part of the theme. We'll see Naomi and Ruth filled throughout the rest of the story by the Lord. But Naomi is also missing that in the beginning of all of this, there was a famine in Bethlehem of Judah. When they left, Naomi says that she had set out full. Well, there was famine. What do you mean you were full? Your family was empty. You didn't have famine. That's why you left in the first place. And so she misses also that the Lord had visited his people to give them bread, to give them food. And so he's begun to fill, and even at this part, they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. And so the very beginnings of God filling Naomi and Ruth have already begun within the story and will lead to the Davidic king. So let's go ahead and close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for your goodness and faithfulness to Naomi and to us, that even where we go astray, even where we're faithless and forgetful of your good provision, and even where we face hardship in this life through the curse that's upon the world and on the earth, and just the suffering because of the sin around us. We know that you are faithful, you are good in all of this, that we can trust you, and that through Naomi, through Ruth, through Boaz, you raised up David, your king, and you have brought forth your ultimate Messiah, your anointed one, your Son, through whom we have the forgiveness of sins through repentance and faith. And so I just pray that you would provide for all of those in need, all of those with ailments and who suffer in this life. We pray for widows and for those who have lost their spouses, husbands, wives. I pray that you'd bless them and be with them and give comfort and peace. And we're just grateful that we can celebrate the Lord's Supper today and the provision of your Son and salvation in him. We pray in his name. Amen.